I Am That, read by Victor Goenka. The Science of Hamza from Vijnana by Bhairava. Age 24. Swami Muktananda. Recently, Baba Muktananda has been revealing the contents of his treasure chest of knowledge. The mysteries he's showing us are not new discoveries, but eternal truths known for many centuries. Here, Baba offers us the most valuable jewel of all, Hamza, which holds the secret of life, the mystery of breath. Baba explains its value according to an ancient document, the Vijnana by Bhairava. The Vijnana by Bhairava is one of the oldest texts of Kashmir Shaivism. It has always been considered an authoritative work, and its verses have been profusely quoted by subsequent exponents of Kashmir Shaivism. In fact, it is held in such high esteem that it is referred to by some as Sri Vijnana by Bhairava Bhattadarka, which means Honorable Lord Vijnana by Bhairava. It is like shimmering blue pearl among Agama scriptures, ancient texts that impart the highest spiritual knowledge through dialogues between Shiva and his consort Parvati. It is called a Tantra, a scientific treatise containing the most sublime teachings on various techniques for attaining the full experience of the consciousness of Shiva, which is the form of inner bliss and is called the state of Bhairava. Every Indian scripture offers its own method of achieving this goal. All these methods are considered valid because they aim at bringing one to the ultimate source of all existence by stilling the mind. The Vijnana by Bhairava is a beautiful garland of 112 such techniques for stilling the mind. It is in the stillness of the mind that the ultimate shines. Just as the pebbles at the bottom of a lake are revealed when the surface is crystal clear and still, without a ripple. The techniques described in the Vijnana by Bhairava are called dharanas, which modern psychiatrists would be tempted to refer to as mental therapies. At the end, after all these techniques have been described, the natural and easy technique of Hamza is advocated. The technique is also referred to in the middle of the text as well as in the first dharana in verse 24. This book is Baba's commentary on that verse. Baba has very clearly brought out the essence of the science of Hamza. It is a simple technique of quietly watching the breath come in and go out without doing anything else. The scriptures say it is Hamza because the incoming breath makes the sound Ham and the outgoing breath the sound Sa. This process goes on continuously day and night in a living being and sounds like the repetition Ham Sa, Ham Sa, Ham Sa. Therefore, Hamza is referred to as mantra, and the continuous process as japa, or mantra repetition. Hamza is also called ajapa, japa, unrepeated repetition, because it is neither repeated by the tongue or the lips, nor counted on beads. It happens by itself, and one has only to become aware of it. Through the practice of watching it, one begins to hear it and knows that it happens naturally. Baba points out that to understand the greatness of Hamza, one must know the secret of prana, the life force, which pulsates through the entire world. Its vibration, called spanda in Kashmir Shaivism, creates and sustains the whole universe. It also gives life to the physical body and makes it function. Everything vibrates very subtly. Every vibration has a sound, and every sound has a vibration. Prana is the subtle vibration of supreme consciousness. Its sound is heard in the process of breathing in and breathing out as Ham and Sa. Therefore, Hamza is also called the Prana mantra, the mantra of prana. In the Vijnana Bhairava, it is described as the utterness of the Supreme Goddess, consciousness. The movement of Ham and Sa is also referred to as the dance of Shiva and Shakti, which manifests the world. Saints allude to Hamsa as Jiva, the individual soul. Some say that it is the name of the breath. It is interesting to note that the Bible speaks of how God created Adam and breathed the breath of life into him. The method of watching this process is to join the mind with the breath. Then, feeling one with Hamza, come in with the incoming breath Ham and go out with the outgoing breath Sa. Between these two breaths there is a moment of complete stillness, like the instant when a pendulum that has completed an arc becomes motionless before swinging back again. It is the place where Ham or Sa merges in the inner or outer space. At this point, the breath is suspended for a while before Sa or Ham again arises from that place. With practice, the time during which the state of stillness is sustained begins to increase, and one experiences the bliss of the self. This space is called Madhidasha, the in-between space, which is the abode of the self, God, truth, or consciousness. It is the place of response. The same space exists between two thoughts. When one thought ends before another arises, there is a fraction of a moment in which nothing happens. The mind stands still. If one can hold onto this moment, all the mysteries of the world will be revealed, for it is the source of all creation. This is why Baba attaches so much importance to this state of stillness. This indeed is the secret of Hamza, the breath, which has been known throughout all time by the great saints. Recently, I happened to read the Essene Gospel of Peace, Book 2. I was amazed to find in it the following words ascribed to Jesus. We worship the holy breath, which is placed higher than all other things created. For Io, the internal and sovereign luminous space, where rule the unnumbered stars, is the air we breathe in, the air we breathe out. And in the moment betwixt the breathing in and the breathing out is hidden all the mysteries of the infinite garden. Baba often says that mind and prana are twin brothers, being two similar aspects of the same Chiti, the supreme consciousness. They are closely related to each other. What happens to one happens to the other. If one is controlled, the other is automatically controlled. Therefore, one of the methods of stilling the mind is to control the prana. The uneven movement of the two breaths creates restlessness in the mind, and then a person perceives duality in the world. When through the practice of Hamza, the Kundalini is awakened, the rhythm of the breath slows down and becomes even. Gradually breathing becomes very subtle, and the breath begins to move inside the sushumana, the central nerve. This makes the mind balanced and quiet. It turns within toward the self and becomes the self. Thus, Jiva, the individual, becomes Shiva, the universal, and experiences unity with all. By the repetition of Hamza, the awareness of Aham Sah, I am that, arises. When Hamza is repeated with the awareness, it sounds like Ham, so Ham, so Ham, so Ham, so Ham, so. This is because according to Sanskrit grammatical rules, when Aham and Sah are used together in a sentence, the A of Aham becomes silent, the H of Sah becomes O, and the preceding A is dropped. For this reason, Hamza is sometimes referred to as Hamzo. As one practices Hamza, I am that recognition of that comes. Gradually, the awareness shifts from I to that. And when this happens, Hamza or Amzo, I am that, reverses and becomes to so Ham, that am I. In one, the emphasis is on Ham, I, in the other on so, that. One starts with individual self-awareness, the other with universal self-awareness, but the meaning of both is the same. Both indicate the identity of the individual self with the Supreme Self. Further, the realization comes that it is the unlimited I consciousness of the universal self which has contracted into the limited I consciousness of the embodied self. Ultimately, even the ideas of I and that disappear, and what is left is only the experience of being one. In other words, the Ha and S of So Am drop away, and what remains is Om, the unified substratum and source of all. Thus, Amza, So, Am, and even Om are one and the same. The distinction between Amza and So, Am is like the distinction between saying the Son belongs to the Father and the Father belongs to the Son. Both points of view are essentially the same. Hamza is the mantra of breath, which one practices while sitting quietly. Baba says that Hamza is the mantra of the self, one's own original mantra. It is always going on within, whether a person knows it or not. Therefore, anyone can practice it. But it has to be learned and its mystery unfolded by the Guru. Guru. At other times, if one prefers, one may repeat any other mantra given by the Guru. Other mantras can be coordinated with the breath, but it is not necessary to do so. If one wishes to coordinate it with the breath, one must repeat the entire mantra with each incoming breath and each outgoing breath. The science of Hamza is the path and practice of great Siddhas. Saints such as Kabir, Nanak, Dadu, Mira, Jananashwar have sung its glory. So does Baba in this book. Hamza is a sublime means through which one attains immortality. Its prescription is outlined in the small book, and it is easily obtained by the Guru's grace. Baba has revealed its secret. To the reader, it is like a Guru mantra. It is a gift from the Guru. Let us watch it with great reverence and with Baba's blessings. Merge into the space between Am and Sa and know the truth. I am that. Swami Prajananda. The prana goes up, out, and the jiva, apana, goes down. These are the utterance of the Supreme Goddess, whose nature is to create. By expanding either of the two spaces between the breaths, one experiences a state of fullness of Bhairava, Vijnana Bhairava. Goes to great trouble to acquire knowledge of the material world. He learns all branches of mundane science. He explores the earth and even travels to the moon. Yet he never tries to find out what exists within himself, because he is unaware of the enormous power which lies hidden within him. He looks for support in the outer world, because he doesn't know the boundless happiness which lies inside his heart. He looks for satisfaction in mundane activities and pleasures, because he doesn't experience the inner love. He looks for love from others. The truth is that the inner self of every human being is supremely great and supremely lovable. Everything is contained in the self. The creative power of this entire universe lies inside every one of us. The divine principle which creates and sustains this world pulsates within us in the form of supremely blissful light. It scintillates in the heart and shines through all our senses. If instead of pursuing knowledge of the outer world, we were to pursue inner knowledge, we would discover that effulgence very soon. Without the knowledge of the self, knowledge of outer things is like a string of zeros. Zeros are valueless until you place a numeral in front of them. In the same way, knowledge of the outer world may bring you great material benefit, but it cannot in itself bring satisfaction. Real happiness, real fulfillment, comes only when you discover the self. To know the self is the true aim and purpose of human life, because he does not understand the glory of his own self. Man gets into the habit of seeing himself as small, as imperfect, and as separate from God. In this way, he denies himself the experience of his divinity. We pursue different spiritual practices only on the sake of experiencing this inner divinity. Yet we cannot attain the self through spiritual practices, because the self is already attained. The self is always with us, just as the sun cannot be separated from its light. The self cannot be separated from us. The power of the self sustains our life. If the self were not present within us, our eyes would not see, nor would our ears hear, nor would our breath come in and go out. It is due to the self that the heart beats, that the mind thinks, discriminates, and fantasizes. It is due to the self that love arises within us. The self gives motive power to all our senses and illuminates the objects we perceive through these senses. This body does not function on its own. Without the presence of the self, it is nothing but a corpse. Not only does the self pervade and sustain our own individual existence, it also pulsates in every atom of this world. In this way, the self is apparent. It is manifest. Some philosophers say that the self cannot be known, yet the self is always being experienced at every moment of our life. A sage wrote, Svatanantra Shavanantra Spurati Satatam Chetashi Shivah, which means the self, Shiva, is supremely pure and independent, and you can experience it constantly, throbbing and pulsating within your mind. It cannot be perceived by the senses, because it makes the senses function. It cannot be perceived by the mind, because it makes the mind think. Still, the self can be known, and to know it, one does not need the help of the mind or the senses. According to Shaivism, the supreme principle has two aspects, prakasha and vimarsha. With prakasha, that principle illuminates everything in the world, including itself. With vimarsha, that principle gives knowledge about the things it illuminates and also differentiates between them. Prakasha makes us know that an object exists, and vimarsha gives us the understanding of the nature of that object. When you look at a book, it is prakasha which makes you aware that something is there, and vimarsha which makes you identify it as a book and not a tape recorder. Prakasha and vimarsha exist in everything in the world. The self is the form of prakasha and vimarsha. It illuminates itself, and it makes itself aware of what it is. The sun which lights the world also lights itself. In the same way, the self, which gives light to the inner and outer senses, also illuminates itself. For this reason, people who have knowledge of the truth say that the self can be known with its own light. A poet has written, "How can the shining sun remain hidden? How can the pulsating self, which gives radiance to all senses and all sense objects, remain obscured?" In the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna says that this very clearly buddhigriyama atindrayam, although it is beyond the senses, it can be known by the subtle intellect. Just as we see our own reflection in a mirror, the self can be seen reflected in the mirror of the purified intellect. The mantra. The scriptures and the saints have described many methods through which one can know the self. Among these, the repetition of the name of God, mantra japa, has been called the highest path and the easiest for the present age. The mystery of mantra is very great. To know the mantra is to know God. The mind achieves one-pointed awareness of God only through mantra. Truly speaking, mantra is not merely letters or syllables. Mantra is the basis of the mind. The universal creative energy, which is one with God, vibrates at the root of the mind, just as it vibrates in everything in the universe. According to Shaivism, that inner pulsation is the true mantra. It is through that we contemplate, perceive, and experience the supreme principle. When the mind immerses itself in that vibration, it is the same as the mantra. The Shiva Sutras say that the mind is mantra, Chittam mantra. The power of mantra repetition lies in its capacity to bring you to the state of oneness with that inner pulsation of consciousness. In fact, Mantra Maheshwaraha. Mantra is the Supreme Lord. Mantra is itself the form of God. His name and nature are not different. This is why you should always repeat the mantra with the understanding that the mantra, the goal of the mantra, and the repeater of the mantra are one. If you think that you, the mantra, and the goal of the mantra are different from each other, you will never realize the mantra's full power. The alphabet itself has immense importance. It is God's creative power, His Shakti, which has taken the form of the letters of the alphabet. God and His creative power are one. And the Shiva Sutras say that all the letters of the alphabet are embodiments of God. The Tantric scriptures say, Mantra Varnat Makashhaha Sarve. Sarve Varnaha Shivatmakachaha. All mantras are composed of letters, and all letters are of the form of Shiva. In Sri Tantra Sabvahava, Shiva says, mantras consist of letters, which are of the form of Shakti. Shakti manifests herself as the alphabet. She is of the form of Shiva. Each letter of the alphabet has its own particular power, or presiding deity. And when the letters are combined in a mantra, their power is multiplied. So mantra has tremendous force. One should repeat it with complete alertness and understanding. As you repeat the mantra, its vibrations mingle with the prana, it's the vital force. They travel to the heart, and from there they pass on to permeate all the 7 constituents of the body, purifying the body and the mind. As the body and the mind become pure, you attain the state in which the mantra repeater and the inner self vibrate together as pure awareness. As long as you repeat the mantra on the gross level, you experience it as sounds and syllables. But through the Guru's grace, you pass beyond this state, and the inner divine nature of the letters is revealed. After you have repeated the mantra for a long time with a quiet mind, it begins to vibrate inwardly. As you repeat the mantra in rhythm with the breath, you get into a state of intoxication. When you begin to feel this intoxication, you can be sure that your practice has begun to bear fruit. In the final stages of this practice, you do not repeat the mantra deliberately. You hear it going within yourself. Hamza. The technique I am about to describe is the teaching of the siddhas, the highest of all spiritual practices. It gives a direct experience of the self. Its knowledge has been passed down from guru to disciple in unbroken lineage. If one receives this mantra from a siddha guru and practices it according to the guru's instructions, one also attains the state of perfection, the state of siddha. The speciality of Hamza is that it works for anyone. It can be practiced very easily and naturally by young people or old people, by people of every country and every religion. One can practice it while living an ordinary life in the world. Through the science of Hamza mantra, one attains that by which everything is attained. One perceives that by which everything is perceived. One knows that by which everything is known. Hamza is the natural mantra. There are many mantras which you can repeat with your tongue. Many mantras which you can repeat on the beads of a japa mala. But Hamza is not like these. Hamza mantra repeats itself spontaneously, along with your breathing. For this reason, it is called your own mantra, or the mantra of the self. The science of Hamza is revealed in the Vijnana Bhairava, one of the supreme scriptures of Shaivism. The Vijnana Bhairava is in the form of a dialogue between a guru and a disciple. The guru is Bhairava, Lord Shiva, the supreme principle of the universe. The disciple is his consort, Bhairavi, the universal mother, who is called Shakti, Shiva's creative energy. Bhairavi, after hearing Bhairava describe the state of the supreme reality, asks him to reveal to her a simple means of knowing that supreme and secret inner principle. In response, Lord Shiva explains to her the awareness of Hamza. Sit quietly and watch the going out and coming in of the breath. The outgoing breath is called prana, and the incoming breath is called apana. Apana is also called jiva, the individual soul, because only when the apana enters the body can it be said that the soul is in the body. If the prana goes out and the apana doesn't come back in, then the body is nothing but a corpse. Bhairava says that as the breath comes in, it makes the sound and as the breath goes out, it makes the sound sa. The sound of the breath coming in and going out is a repetition of Hamza mantra. This mantra goes on continually in all living creatures. It is due to its pulsation that we are alive. In a human being, the breath comes in and goes out 21,600 times a day, and each time it repeats this mantra. We may think we're repeating the mantra at certain times, but in reality, it goes on spontaneously, 21,600 times a day. This is how enlightened beings understand mantra repetition. The great saint Kabir described this in one of his poems, saying, "I am not repeating the mantra on my beads, nor am I repeating it with my tongue. God himself is repeating my mantra while I sit quietly and listen to it." This is known as ajapa japa, the unrepeated mantra repetition. One who simply watches the breath, being aware that it is coming in and going out, with the sounds ham and sa, is doing ajapa japa. And this is the true way of practicing the mantra. The repetition of Hamza mantra is also called Hamza Gayatri. It is the self-born mantra. The Lord himself initiates us into this mantra when we are in our mother's womb. It is said in the Garbha Upanishad that when the fetus in the womb is 7 months old, the soul perceives knowledge of its past and future. It knows who it has been and who it will be. When the movie of its lives passes before its mind, it becomes frightened and begins moving restlessly here and there. Whichever direction the fetus tries to move, it runs into trouble. As it moves upward, it comes up against the stomach. There, it is burnt by the gastric fire. It moves away and bumps into the kidney. The kidney is very salty, and when the fetus receives the shock of that, it moves away again. But when it moves away from the kidney, it comes up against the intestines, which stink. In this way, it keeps moving all the time, and wherever it moves, a new difficulty arises to welcome it. Finally, the fetus becomes desperate and begins to call out to God for help. Now, God has been watching all this. And when at last the soul starts crying out and taking refuge in Him, God bestows His grace upon it. He gives it instruction in So Hum, which means that am I, and which is the same as Hamza mantra. As the fetus repeats the mantra, it begins to understand its identity with the Supreme Principle. It becomes immersed, and the So-Am awareness, the awareness of its true nature, and becomes calm and serene. However, when 9 months are over, the fetus is forcibly ejected from the mother's womb. The moment it comes out, it starts crying, making the sound kwang kwang or ko-hum, ko-hum. It forgets God's instruction and the understanding it has attained. It forgets the awareness of So-Am and cries ko-hum, which means who am I? From that moment, it begins to identify itself in different ways, saying, I am this body. I belong to a particular class. I am a woman. I am a man. I am a sinner. It becomes established in this kind of understanding and lives its life accordingly. Yet all the time, Hamza is going on. When the child comes out of the womb, it first breathes out and then breathes in with the sound hum. From then on, the mantra keeps repeating itself, because one doesn't remember that one has been initiated into the mantra. One goes to a guru. However, the mantra is already going on inside. All one has to do is become aware of it. To understand the secret of Hamza, one first has to understand the secret of prana. One should never underestimate the value of prana, the vital force. All beings are alive because of prana. In fact, prana pervades and supports the entire world. Even trees and mountains exist with its support. The word prana has two different meanings. It refers both to the vital force of the universe and to the exhalation. Although prana is one within the human body, it takes 5 forms, known as prana, apana, samana, uyana, and udana. In these 5 forms, it flows through the system of 72,000 nadis, or bodily channels, and carries on all the processes of our life. Everything depends on prana. Prana is life itself. When the prana stops moving in and out of the body, there is either samadhi or death. It is the power of the self, the universal consciousness, which comes in and goes out as the breath. A scriptural author says, the universal consciousness becomes prana. So the sound which the breath makes as it flows in and out is the utterness of that supreme consciousness, the universal energy, who creates this universe out of her own being, and who, when she resides in the human body, is known as Kundalini. Kundalini herself is repeating the mantra Hamsa. Hamsa is the actual sound of God. The utterance of Kundalini, which goes on continually, and which we know as inhalation and exhalation, vibrates. According to Shaivism, it is this vibration which creates the inner and outer worlds. It is said God originally manifested as sound, from which emanated the letters of the alphabet. Ham and Sa are the source of all these letters. They are the original sound vibrations which manifests the universe. The entire world is of the form of the words which have emanated from these two syllables. Words are the source of all our different feelings. Through words, we experience the dualities of pleasure and pain, good and evil, virtue and sin. If someone calls you a sinner, you feel insulted and ashamed. But if someone calls you a good person, you become happy. This is the duality created by words. And because of this duality, we suffer or experience happiness. Yet all these feelings and states are nothing more than the play of the two syllables Ham and Sa, because all words have emanated from them. To understand these two syllables as they are is liberation. Ham, the sound which comes in with the inhalation, is Shiva, the pure I consciousness, the inner self. Sa, which goes out with the out-breath, is Shakti, God's creative energy. Inhalation and exhalation are the dance of Shiva and Shakti, of God and His creative energy. If you perceive this with true understanding, you realize the truth immediately. By understanding the mystery of Hamsa, one comes to know the self. The mantra Hamsa is the source of all knowledge. Therefore, to obtain knowledge, you should repeat it. The poet Kalidas, who knew the mystery of words, said that whether it is a mundane or spiritual life, you cannot understand anything without using words. You can describe an object only when it has a name, only when letters are combined into words and have a meaning. The word conveys the knowledge of an object. In the same way, knowledge of God is contained in these two syllables. Until you become aware that the mantra is going on within you, you should repeat it. As you repeat it, sitting quietly and combining the two syllables with the breath, you eventually begin to understand that it is happening on its own. You begin to hear it coming in and going out with the breath. You should understand this very clearly, because it is a mystery which only a sharp and subtle intelligence can grasp. As you watch the breath coming in and going out, you will become aware that when it comes into a distance of 12 fingers and merges. The place where it merges is called Hridaya, the heart. The breath merges here, and then it arises again and goes out to a distance of 12 fingers and merges in the space outside. The outer space is called Dvadashananta, the external heart. Here, the heart does not mean the physical organ. The heart is the place where the breath merges. Inside and outside. In reality, these two places are one. The duality of inner and outer space exists only because we have the sense of our physical body. The moment we transcend our body consciousness, the inner and outer spaces merge. This happens naturally through the repetition of Hamza. When the breath comes in with a sound and merges inside, there is a fraction of a moment which is completely still and free from thought. This is the Mad Hayadasha, the space between the breaths. This is where you have to focus in meditation, the space where Ham merges inside before Sa has risen. Is the abode of God, of consciousness, of the self. The place where Sa merges outside is equally the place of God. One who comes to know that moment of the merging of the two syllables experiences the truth. As you watch the breath with Ham and Sa, contemplate that space and allow it to extend itself. That still space between the breaths, that space where no thoughts exist, is the true goal of the mantra. The yoga scriptures mention many different forms of pranayama and kumbhaka, suspension of breath, which yogis practice in order to get into samadhi. But Shaivism says that pranayama and kumbhaka should happen naturally, through the inspiration of God. The state of stillness, which occurs when the syllables merge, inside and outside, is natural kumbhaka. You don't have to make a deliberate effort to hold your breath, because as you practice Hamza, the time of the suspension of breath begins to expand. The duration of the kumbhaka increases naturally as long as the breath is suspended. You experience the self. This is the state of samadhi. From there arises perfect bliss. The purpose of repeating Hamza mantra is to attain this state. Sometimes people express confusion about whether to repeat Hamza or Soham, but there is no reason for confusion because Hamza is Soham and Soham is Hamza. Both mantras are one. One can use whichever form of the mantra one likes, whichever one the Guru gives. Through practicing the mantra, you come to know the space where the two syllables arise and subside. That is the state of God, and we take the help of the two syllables just to attain it. Until you get into the state where the mantra syllables merge, keep repeating the mantra, but understand that the true goal of the mantra is that awareness. Once King Janaka was sitting on the bank of a river, repeating Soham at the top of his voice. A sage named Ashtavakra happened to be passing by. He was a great knower of truth, an enlightened being. When he saw Janaka, he was surprised. He knew that Janaka was a being with great understanding, so he wondered why he was repeating Soham, Soham in this manner. Great beings do not teach only through philosophical discourses. They use many subtle means to make their point. Ashtavakra watched Janaka for a while, wondering how he should instruct him. Then he had an idea. He sat down. In one hand, he had a water bowl, and in the other hand, he had the T-shaped stick, which yogis use for support in meditation. He began to say very loudly, "This is my water bowl. This is my yoga stick. This is my water bowl. This is my yoga stick." King Janaka began repeating his mantra louder. The sage also began to repeat his mantra louder. After a while, King Janaka became annoyed. He opened his eyes and asked, "Oh, brother, what are you doing?" "What are you doing?" asked Ashtavakra. "I'm repeating the mantra, so Janaka said. Ashtavakra said, "I'm also repeating a mantra. I'm repeating, 'This is my water bowl, this is my yoga stick.'" The king said, "Have you lost your brains? Who told you that the water bowl and the stick don't belong to you? Why do you have to keep shouting about it?" The sage replied, "It seems to me that you are the one who lacks understanding. Who told you that you are not that? Who do you have to go on repeating that you are that?" When Janaka heard this, he suddenly realized that he was that, and that he did not need to go on repeating, so This is what we also need to understand. Ham Sa is not a mantra that you merely repeat. What you have to do is become established in the awareness of the mantra going on inside you, in the goal of the mantra, in the pulsation, which exists in the space where the syllables arise and subside. When I say meditate on your own self, that is what I mean. To meditate on yourself means to attain this space. This is very natural sadhana. It is the highest knowledge. There is no greater knowledge than the knowledge of Hamsa. No greater japa than ajapa japa. This means that this mantra is the same for everybody. No matter which country you come from, no matter which religion you follow, your breath comes in with the sound Ham and goes out with the sound Sa. This mantra comes from the deepest level of speech. It emanates spontaneously with the breath. A true yogi is one who does this natural pranayama, uniting his incoming and outgoing breaths with the syllables Ham and Sa, and performing this natural japa ajapa japa. In this way, a yogi brings himself and God together. He unites himself with the self, from which he has become separated. There are people who do a few postures and pranayama and call themselves yogis, but these are not true yogis. A true yogi is one who becomes established in his own self with the awareness of Amsa, of I am that. Once one is established in this state, meditation goes on continually, whatever one is doing. Kabir wrote, "The unrepeated mantra repetition, So Ham, destroys all your sins and virtues." The So Ham awareness is also described as the awareness Aham Brahmasmi, I am the Absolute. Thou art that. It is the understanding of your identity with the Supreme Principle, and this understanding has the power to destroy all your accumulated karmas and past impressions. Not only does it destroy the effects of millions of sins, it also cuts the bondage which arises from your good actions. It puts an end to the cycle of birth and death, killing the notion of duality. As long as you have the feeling of duality, the feeling that one human being is different from another, that one class is different from another, you cannot experience real happiness. The sense of otherness is the source of all fear, of all suffering, and of all sins. However, as one practices Hamza, the consciousness of equality dawns. In a natural manner, the mind and the breathing are intimately connected, for it is the movement of prana which creates the countless universes that arise and subside in the mind. When the breath is uneven, the mind becomes disturbed, and the sense of duality arises as the breath becomes even. The mind automatically becomes still, ordinary. People often breathe rapidly, and their outgoing breath is expelled. For a long distance, this indicates an outgoing mind. As the mantra goes deeper, the breathing slows, and the outgoing breath becomes shorter. The incoming and outgoing breaths become even. And as this happens, the mind and senses turn inward, toward the self. The purpose of all the pranayama which hatha yogis perform is to balance the duration of inhalation and exhalation, because it is the balance which quiets the mind and brings the awareness of equality. This happens very easily and naturally through the practice of Hamza. As one becomes aware of Hamza, the breathing naturally begins to come in and go out to the same distance and for the same length of time. The spontaneous suspension of breath, which I have already described, happens automatically. In the still space where the breath merges, the feeling of duality disappears, and one becomes conscious of the equality of all things. Jananeshwar Maharaj said, "As you become aware of Soham, the body consciousness dissolves, and the senses, which have been wandering among outer objects, automatically turn within. Then you experience the union of Shiva and Shakti within yourself." Outside and inside become one. The syllable Ham, which comes in with Apana, is the seed mantra of the self, the embodied self, which experiences itself as I, is really the divine self. This Aham, this I, has two forms. One is the ordinary I consciousness, the ego sense, which identifies itself with the body and senses, which considers itself to be man or woman, American or Spanish or Indian, black or white. The other I is the true Aham, the pure I consciousness, and this I is God. The ordinary I is consciousness in bondage. The pure I is consciousness in the state of liberation. As you repeat Hamza with the understanding of the perfect Aham, this realization dawns. When you begin to have the awareness of this pure I, the intellect too becomes purified, and then you're able to perceive God shining within. The knowledge that you are the self arises spontaneously within you. The moment you perceive the supreme principle in the mantra, you're liberated. Janeshwar Maharaj said, just as light pervades everywhere, the So-Am consciousness extends from the embodied self to the supreme self. When man becomes fully immersed in the So-Am vision, he spontaneously merges in the Supreme Being. Knowledge of God is a matter of understanding. You don't have to make an effort to find God, because there is no place where God is not. He is not something you're going to attain. You're simply supposed to become aware of Him. In the same way, the science of Hamza is simply a matter of awareness. It is the highest sadhana because one does not do the practice. One simply becomes aware that the principle is happening on its own. The Guru Gita says, Ham Bijam. Ham is the seed, and in the seed of the self, the entire universe is contained. In the same way, Hamza mantra is the seed of all spiritual practices. Just as a huge banyan tree springs from a tiny seed and contains branches, roots, leaves, flowers, and fruit, and thousands of other seeds, the seed of Hamza contains yoga, meditation, japa, austerities, and all powers. The great saint Namdev said, just keep repeating Soham, Soham all the time, and you yourself will become God. This mantra has the power to transform you completely. Siddha Yoga. As you keep repeating the mantra, as through the Guru's grace you become aware that it is going on within the inner Kundalini energy, which has been dormant, awakens automatically. The Upanishads say the Kundalini Shakti operates through the power of Hamza, which is not different from the self. Hamza flows with the prana, the vital force, and the prana flows through the nadis, the bodily channels. One who strives for liberation without knowing the science of Hamza is like one who tries to satisfy his hunger by eating the sky. When through the practice of Hamza, the inhalation and exhalation become balanced and the breath is retained, in spontaneous kumbhaka, the breath, which has been going on in and out, moves through the Ida and Pingala nadis, moves into the Sushumna, the central channel. The inner Kundalini, which has been dormant, becomes active and begins to unfold. Then a self-born yoga, the yoga of the Siddhas, takes place within you. The awakening of Kundalini brings about the completion of the spiritual journey. Until Kundalini awakens, you practice yoga by your own efforts and according to your own whim. But the yoga which takes place after Kundalini has awakened naturally happens according to the inspiration of God. In a spontaneous manner, while you go about your daily life, Kundalini is the energy which has created the entire universe. And when she is awakened within you, she works with her full power. Moving within the body, she causes yoga postures and pranayama to take place spontaneously, as they are necessary. She purifies the blood and the bodily fluids, and makes the body strong and free of disease. She stills the mind and focuses the attention within. Meditation occurs naturally, and knowledge arises on its own. As Kundalini unfolds, the inner world is revealed to you. Every day you have new realizations which fill you with wonder. The world of yoga is full of amazing things as Kundalini unfolds. One sees new colors and scintillating the inner lights. One hears exquisite divine sounds, tastes subtle nectars, smells celestial fragrances. One travels to different inner worlds. Love for all creatures begins to pulse within, and happiness bubbles up continuously. As one pursues the self-born yoga, the light of the self reveals itself. Watching this tender, infinitely fascinating light, the blue pearl, the yogi becomes aware of his true glory through smaller than a sesame seed. The tiny blue pearl contains the entire universe. It is the light of God, the form of God within us. One day, this tiny light expands to fill the universe, and then the yogi experiences his all-pervasiveness. He attains the state of the supreme truth, the state which is beyond all pain and pleasure. He experiences the true bliss of consciousness. He knows without any doubt, I am God and God is me. Such a yogi lives in consistent awareness of the self, in the state of perfect fearlessness and freedom. This is liberation. This is what you attain through the practice and the understanding of Hamsa. This is the secret of Siddha's sadhana. This, the practice of perfect beings. This is the wisdom of the greatest saints. Practice it with great reverence. There is no greater mantra than this one, no greater worship than meditation, no greater deity than the self. Always remember this. It is the final instruction of the Guru, the command of Shiva. The science of Hamsa is the science of the self. It is the source of all knowledge. It is God's gift to us. Repeat it with respect. Sit very quietly. Become aware of the breath coming in and going out. Repeating Hamsa, Hamsa, Hamsa. Understand that is the perfect I and pure consciousness. Understand that is the universal energy. Focus subtly on the place where these syllables arise and subside, and you will know the self. This is the true state of God, and you are that. The end.